Hello everybody, we won't talk here again. Have you ever been angry that you may not be able to afford buying a home? Did you ever wish you could hop on a train in Columbus and be in New York in under 4 hours? Are you taking classes at Hawking because your big dreams of a prestigious 4-year university are too expensive? Have you already told yourself that you won't have children because you don't have the money to raise them? What if I told you all of these problems come from the same source, and even though it affects every single aspect of our lives, it operates right under our noses? We as Americans live in a capitalist society run by the rich and for the rich, and we the masses are completely ignored in this equation. What was once famed as the system that births innovative discoveries through business incentives has now long been distorted into an oppressive system with the goal of further enlarging the gap between the working class, or the proletariat, and the owning class, the bourgeoisie. In this speech, I will cover the countless evils of capitalism and both the incentives and the bureaucracies that keep it in power, before I paint a picture of a fairer future that still excels industrially, providing examples of what it could look like and how we can achieve it. This brings me to my first main point, which is the big American dream. One of the most important American values for nearly 250 years has been freedom. Freedom of speech, religion, gun ownership, and business. Unfortunately, when each individual citizen is focused on their own personal freedoms, their personal home, and their personal car, we are blinded from the things that could better our society collectively and equally. I call this toxic individualism, and it is subconsciously one of the biggest arguments against anti-capitalist reform. It is only in a society such as ours, where the richest country on earth has embarrassing transit networks and zero high-speed rail lines, because we're taught that freedom means driving your own car exactly to and from where you need to go. Likewise, it is only under a capitalist society poisoned with toxic individualism that people making $40,000 a year advocate against higher taxes on billionaires, simply because they believe they could make it themselves there one day. Why can't they? Allow me to explain. On paper, capitalism is simply an economic system in which the means of production are privately owned, meaning it actually is possible to start up your own business and climb up to the ranks of the very top of wealth owners. That is, if you were born rich, abolish bathroom breaks in your factories, and pay the government to rid you of those pesky minimum wage and workers' rights laws. Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States and a pioneer in tripling the national debt and destroying black neighborhoods, was a devout advocate for unregulated capitalism and was famously known for Reaganomics, also known as trickle-down economics, in which the richest of the rich get lower taxes and less checks of power. The name suggests Reagan thought his revolutionary fiscal policies would make the masses richer as big businesses send their newfound profits trickling down. Unfortunately, this never happened, and Reagan's wretched stain on American politics and economics remains both a stronghold support for and a glaring flaw in the face of capitalism even today. The system itself, through unfair taxes and a subsequent lack of social welfare, keeps you at the very bottom and keeps those lounging and hoarding at the top, the ones whose great-great-great-grandfathers got to the money first, right where they are, if not soaring even higher. So what could the oligarchs be telling us to keep us so oblivious? Capitalist propaganda is dangerous, misleading, and often incredibly difficult to spot. For example, have you ever heard about the story that Jeff Bezos started Amazon from his parents' garage? It's such an inspiring story. It really shows you that it doesn't matter where you start. Anyone can become a billionaire tech mogul like Bezos. Except, the media forgot to mention that it wasn't his parents' garage. It was a rented garage in Bellevue, Washington. They also missed the $250,000 payment Bezos received from his parents, who supported his dream and funded the beginnings of his company. Big business wants you to believe that under capitalism you can do anything. But the truth is, Jeff Bezos was born on third base, and he made the other 99.9 repeating percent of his billions, exploiting his worker empire and figuratively selling his soul for profit margins. So, we've covered the dangerous lies fed to the American people in support of capitalism. But with freedom of speech comes the growing of anti-capitalist sentiment. Why doesn't this translate to policy? This brings me to my next point. It's a big club, and you're not in it. In a system where campaigns run on money through staff, marketing, travel, and events, aspiring politicians often turn to the potential supporters with the most wealth. Corporations see this coming, which is why lobbies exist. Lobbies are hired groups of people representing corporations who pay the way for these politicians to get elected, in exchange for said politicians legislatively and rhetorically supporting the corporation's goals, essentially legalized bribery. To relate this to current events, The question of why there is so much American taxpayer money funneled into the places like the State of Israel is for the next subpoint. But as for why so many elected officials here still refuse to condemn the apartheid state, even after 2 full years of bombing and gunning down a population they had previously already been starving, that's because the Israel lobby has too much money on their hands. And in fear of criticism of their country's genocidal tendencies, that excess money is sent right into the pockets of these aspiring politicians, turning them into incredibly successful elected officials who happen to be undying supporters of the State of Israel. While Israel's strategic location will be touched on again, it is not the only lobby debilitating the voices of the American people. The car and oil lobbies paying our representatives keep the country adding lanes to freeways instead of kickstarting transit infrastructure, further dividing us into our individualistic bubbles, harmful to both the environment and the good of the people, disguised as vehicles of personal freedom. I briefly mentioned the peculiarity regarding America's initial and ongoing disproportionate flow of taxpayer dollars into the State of Israel. I'm not here to put conspiracy theories into your head, but I should point out that this 80-year-old country, built largely with American support, happens to be nestled right in the middle of one of the most oil-rich regions in the world, and that its military forces train with our police. For hopefully evident reasons, this is a perfect segue into capitalism's best friend, imperialism. Imperialism at its core means to extend your country's influence to the outside world through either diplomacy or military forces. Under capitalism, our system needs both new markets and endless growth, something that simply cannot exist in a developed capitalist country exhausted of all of its business efforts. For this reason, we are incentivized to colonize and spread our ideologies globally. Not only must we scour and exploit resource-rich countries to enrich ourselves, but we must also snuff out any force driving a global or even continental contempt for capitalism. Yes, Castro and Stalin were conniving murderers, but the real reason we fought in the Cold War was because Latin America and the Soviet Union alike were discovering both the idiocracies and the horrors of capitalism, and had started pushing for a far more sensible and humane distribution of wealth. Yes, Osama bin Laden was an evil lunatic, but the real reason we went after the entire Muslim world in the War on Terror, besides xenophobia, was because September 11th gave us a perfect excuse to plant ourselves in these nearby oil-rich nations for decades to come, and bring home more for the lobby, making corporations and oligarchs richer. It should be clear at this point the incentive by capitalism for imperialism, and the true horror it brings about. So, clearly capitalism is proven to wreak havoc not just upon the nation, but upon the rest of the world. But what's less evident is how it completely goes against American values and the vision our founding fathers had. Propaganda is responsible for this, tricking us all into believing billionaires are geniuses, war is necessary, and inequality is normal. In Philadelphia, 1776, Thomas Jefferson himself wrote that all men are created equal. It was with this statement which Dr. King fought for the civil rights of African Americans, and which the criminalization of same-sex marriage was challenged. While the fight continues, these rights were largely given. Yet there is one last glaring inequality that we have completely failed to address. If all men are created equal, why do some hoard hundreds of billions of dollars where others quietly die hungry and cold on the street? Unchecked capitalism has distorted and abandoned the vision our founding fathers once had, and defies both the Constitution and human nature. Many defenders of capitalism bring up human nature, claiming that the individual right to business is something that all people crave. My rebuttal: walk up to a 10-year-old untainted by capitalist propaganda. Explain to them people exist who hold more money than they and their families could spend in a lifetime, and ask them, should we use this unnecessary money to feed the poor, to house them, to pay for school? The answer is undoubtedly yes, to a 10-year-old and to anyone whose empathy overrides their greed. Unfortunately, these sensible people will never matter under capitalism. When politicians need money to win, and only the corporations who value profit over human life have the money to lend, it is only their interests that are addressed. Wealth, once it reaches a certain threshold, is political power. For this reason, elected officials are beholden to the interest of capital rather than the people, and democracy has therefore been completely undermined and rendered useless in place of an oligarchy, a government entirely controlled by the 1%, the big club. This is exactly what makes challenging capitalism from the inside seemingly impossible. At this point, it seems all hope is lost. Our politicians are bought out, our presidents are lying to us, and the divide between gluttonous owners and starving workers only furthers, as the myth of a middle class fades. But there are varying solutions to capitalism, and things we ourselves can do to help diminish its monopoly. This brings me to my third and final point, which centers around seizing a fairer future. In daunting times, it's helpful to remember that change begins locally. I know you have a strong sense of justice, but for far too long, you've allowed the system to tell you your voice means nothing. I don't blame you. but I do urge you to attend town hall meetings, to research where your elected officials get their money, and to call them out when they aren't doing their job of serving their constituents fairly. Capitalism has manufactured our consent to act against us, but it all starts with breaking the spell of nationwide capitalist psychosis, and from there, truly anything can happen. Politicians are used to reporters asking easy and unimportant questions out of fear they won't get another chance with these officials. You are not a reporter. When your elected official says something you know to be untrue and to go against the benefit of the people, it is your obligation to clearly point out their deception and to ask them what could possibly make them say something they also know to be untrue. It is your right and obligation to embarrass them. They know they're lying, but if you can convince enough of your peers and fellow constituents they are, that is when the real change starts. We've actually already seen successful examples of candidates going against the capitalist establishment and winning. No greater in recent events than the first-generation immigrant, state assemblyman, and an open democratic socialist slated to be the next mayor of our country's most populous city, Zohran Mamdani. I have been closely following his race since April, and I've seen what happens when you try to do what Mamdani did, and how to get through it. As a relative amateur in elected politics and a previously unheard name, Mamdani had no ties or lobbied obligations to support any specific industry or policy, and didn't seek out corporate donations to fund his campaign. Rather, in the spirit of anti-capitalism, Mamdani reached out to the working people of New York for small individual donations in exchange for a promise to always put the collective well-being of his constituents first. This people-first message, in addition to a tech-savvy grassroots campaign team the assemblyman acquired simply by being the only candidate actually living, working, and scraping by in New York City, led Mamdani to win the Democratic primary and become the official Democratic candidate for the mayoral race. It was at this point when it became evident that parties do not matter when it comes to challenging capitalism. Mamdani had the freedom to push for what the people know in their hearts to be right, and this terrified the Democratic Party's establishment, one rooted in corruption and filled with sellouts. As a Muslim man advocating against Israel's genocide, he was plagued by Israeli-influenced Democrats with accusations to do with anti-Semitism, terrorism, and totalitarian Islamic theocracy. In reality, this is a man wishing for free transit and child care, paid for by the loose change of greedy Wall Street billionaires who couldn't bring themselves to care about the average New Yorker. But even after securing the Democratic nominee, establishment Democrats refused to endorse the man who spoke out against lobbying and corruption, showing their true colors as servants of capital, not their constituents. Contrary to what the media tells you, Mamdani doesn't even call himself a communist. He doesn't even call himself a socialist. Democratic socialism is still considered a subset of capitalism, and is but the first step to redistributing wealth fairly. But even that terrifies the 1% and kickstarts a barrage of slander campaigns against the man. Regardless, Mamdani stood strong, reminding himself that this 1% is just that, a minority among millions working to survive. He won the hearts and minds of the working class and pulled through against all odds to remind those struggling to survive under the pressures of capitalism that with persistence and clear messaging, we can build a better future for our nation. It's my own belief that Mamdani is less capitalist than even he lets on. In fact, his father is a Marxist scholar, so why does Mamdani feel the need to soft-launch his likely communist economic stance? This goes back to capitalist propaganda. The Red Scare was a period in time where American and capitalist propaganda depicted the Soviets as barbaric troopers dead set on destroying American civilization. The USSR did not adhere to Marx and Engels' definition of communism, opting for state-managed capitalism, and due to this, the poorly managed totalitarian regime could not and did not show off the gains possible under true communism. Despite this, the USSR called themselves communist and socialist interchangeably, and now, instead of imagining equal rights and strengthened communities, Westerners now think of these terms and immediately are reminded of the millions starved under Stalin or the political opposers assassinated by him. This poor example, along with capitalist propaganda, takes decades upon decades to dispel, which is possibly why Mamdani retained from outing his Marxist views. Now, he's been elected along with other progressive leftist candidates around the country, and he has the opportunity to advocate seizing the means of production. Slowly and from the inside, the mask is slipping and voters are acknowledging the evils of our system and wishing for reform. It's crucial to normalize these views in order to gain voter popularity, because most people actually want communism or socialism, but just don't like when it's called such. I think of Star Trek. Captain Picard says in a film canon to the series, "You see, money doesn't exist in the 24th century. The acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force of our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity." He doesn't say it, but Picard is actually describing communism, a stateless, classless, moneyless society. Obviously, the series is set far in the future. This said, it's fair to say that the technological advances made in the series likely could not have come about if there were separate coalitions fighting for which planets they want to colonize. and the masses would likely be stuck on their own planets regardless, space travel being a privatized industry reserved for the 1%. My point is that communism has long been painted as oppressive and malevolent, but in true practice, it is the definition of progress and equity. However, even beyond propaganda and poor examples, there are still reasonable arguments or concerns against full communism. For example, doesn't capitalism breed innovation with its business opportunities? Under communism, there wouldn't be an incentive to work hard, and advancements like iPhones wouldn't exist. Funnily enough, most of what this hypothetical person is saying isn't actually wrong. In reality, however, capitalism relies on one person's idea exploiting hundreds if not thousands of workers. So while it does breed individual innovation, the net effect is negative on the population as a whole. Under communism, technological science will be managed and funded by the government, meaning that every worker down to the man who tightened the screws onto your battery is getting paid a fair and livable wage. Not only does this mean that the advanced technology of smartphones would still be developed due to the government-funded research, but it also means that your phone would actually be of better quality, for two reasons. One, every worker is being paid enough to live comfortably, making for a stress-free and productivity-first work environment. Two, this person is correct. There would be no iPhones, rather brandless smartphones. This is because there would be no Apple to exploit cheap and outsourced slave/child labor and delay innovations until next year's release to maximize profits. In my scenario, the work stays in the country, everyone is paid fairly, and technological outcomes are far greater than under capitalism. It is with examples such as this that we must dispel myths and fears regarding communism. It is only once the proletariat has done this will we be able to gain the mandate of the people and unite towards the cause of distributing wealth fairly, and keeping every last citizen in mind while paving the way for a brighter future. To conclude, in the hands of corrupt politicians and increasingly wealthy corporations, the system that was adopted to fuel your creativity has long since been contorted into oppressive and overarching spirit killer. In the quest for individual freedom, our community mindset has been snuffed out, replaced with selfish pipe dreams of massive success and wealth. Capitalism in its earliest adaptation emerged from feudalism. The king became the oligarchs, the lords became the bureaucracy, the knights became the military, and the serfs, the slaves, became the workers. The writing is on the wall, and change is imminent in the face of such a barbaric and outdated system. I'm not asking you to start a revolution from your apartment, but in times such as these when we face a totalitarian imperialist oligarchy at home, the best thing you can do is be aware. Aware that these problems you face are manufactured by a small group of liars. Aware that in the time it takes you to read this sentence, there are people in this country making more than your salary. Aware that you and your vote determine the future of this country entirely. Wealth distribution starts with socialism, with subsidizing education, healthcare, and childcare. Next, through eliminating the bureaucracy, we must establish absolute democracy, seizing the means of both production and policy for the people. Believe it or not, an economic system that operates in the favor of the masses flourishes more than that which disproportionately benefits the 1%. We as humans first were never meant to print paper with alleged value and interact transactionally under its control. We were never meant to divide ourselves into classes based on this superficial currency. We have always been meant to work alongside our brothers and sisters in creating a prosperous society for all, and to especially leave a brighter future for our children. Seen today, capitalism leaves nothing for our children but global warming and literally being priced out of existence. But this does not have to be the end. Your ideas for the future may look different than mine, but I remind you once more to stay aware, stay vocal, and stay fighting, because a tipping point is approaching, and only one can survive. Capitalism or humanity. Choose humanity. Thank you.